Well, next up, we are going to talk about a different kind of love story. It might be something you don't necessarily think of a love story, but Sarah Nannen, the author of Grief Unveiled, is going to make you think about grief in a whole new way. Thank you for joining us. So Grief Unveiled, here it is. It's a widow's guide to navigating your journey of life after loss. So you found the man, you caught him, you kept him, and things did not go the way they were promised in the fairy tale,
Right.
Sarah. What happened?
So I was a military spouse at the time, and he was a hunky fighter pilot who had a fast-moving job, and it ended tragically, unfortunately, in an accident a little over 3 years ago. And I was given all kinds of resources. People wanted to save me. People wanted to help me. I was so grateful for all of the ways people showed up for me. But I always felt a little invisible and a little small in that process. And the message just kept being about my suffering and how my job was to survive. And so I wanted to write a different kind of book that was changing the conversation around grief and talking about how widowhood does leave you forever changed, but it doesn't have to mean suffering forever.
So how do you think that most people see, especially a young widow? I know this book would apply to any widow, but when you're a young widow, you had young kids, you had a baby at the time. So how do you think people see widowhood, and how is the conversation you want to have different, or you have been having, really, I've watched over the last few months?
So we treat widowhood as a thing that happens to you, like a bad disease or a horror. It's a victim thing that happens to you, and it is tragic. It's horrible. It's painful, and it's a hard road to walk. But it doesn't mean that it changes who you are. You still exist. The person still exists. So people talk about having cancer, and all anyone wants to talk about to them is now their cancer, and how's the treatments, and what's the chemo like. But that person is still there too, and it's a similar thing in widowhood where people want to say, how are you? And you tell them that you bought a house, and they're like, yes, but how are you? And it just gets old after a while because there's no dialogue around the forward motion. And so I'm really trying to write a book that helps people acknowledge the depth of their pain and also honor the gift of the life that they're still living and give them hope that there is life beyond this tragedy, that you move through the grief and it changes who you become.
Well, this is the thing I think is interesting is the word widow, it's very odd. Like we have like married, I am married. That says something about my status, or I am single, that says it. But I am a widow. It's so about your identity. Like we say, like people have cats, but it's a totally different thing if we call someone a cat lady.
For sure.
But it feels like widow is this label that in an instant, not only do you lose your spouse, which presumably sucks, although for some people maybe not, but it's a whole different problem. Yeah. Talk to Sarah about that one. There's probably hours of discussion there. But so you have that whole thing happening, but then you almost lose yourself. It's like you all of a sudden you're a new person. You've got a new label. You're supposed to look sad, wear black. Are there certain rules they hand out that moment?
Yeah, there's all these unspoken rules that no one wants to talk about, but everyone knows.
Like red lipstick. I didn't see. Is that allowed?
Off the list.
Okay.
For sure.
I did get that memo. I was wondering if maybe you didn't.
So you find yourself constantly weighing every choice you make under this weird judgment that's actually your own, but you think it's everyone else. So should I wear this wedding ring? And how long can I wear it? Is it too long? Because if I leave it on too long, then I need to move on. But if I take it off too soon, then I'm ready to like...
That's sort of trashy.
Right. There's every single breath every day is like, am I doing this right? How can I get this right? So that no one hates me in the end of all of this. And so there's, it's constantly weighing everything you do against these imaginary rules.
Right. So unexpected. So I'm going to ask you, so Jana is asking, it's such a great question for you. Jana wants to know, if you were to revise your book, how would you revise it? How would you respond to people's critiques? So you actually did this. You finished your manuscript. It was one book. It was a perfectly fine book. It was a perfectly fine book. I read it. And you got out there. You started working with people with your process. And then you did a pretty massive revision in the last 2 months or so, 3 months or so. So talk about the process of revising. Why did you revise? How do you know when to? What are your thoughts about that? And make sure you shout out to your editor, too.
Yes, thanks, Cynthia. So I did write the book the first time, and actually when I turned it in to you and Cynthia, I said, this is not the real book. This is the book that I was being scared behind. And then I wrote it a second time, and I was Professor Sarah, so I was trying to prove everything was true and factual. So the third time, I finally got it right. And that was when I decided that I was going to be a little more vulnerable, and I was going to share the raw depth of what I experienced and what my clients were brave enough to share with me. And that's where there is no critique. Like, this is my experience. This is my clients' experiences. And sure, I'm changing the conversation around grief, and I'm breaking the stereotypes of what it means to grieve and what's allowed in widowhood. And that's what's important. That's why it's important to write the book, because I want to change the conversation, and I want people to know that there is life after loss, and it doesn't have to look like suffering.
One of the things that comes up from our authors, and I warn our authors, you can take this as one of your first warnings, is when you commit 100% to your book, stuff shows up. And for our authors, that's been cancer diagnosis, somebody had a surprise kitchen remodel, somebody lost a parent, so many things happen, and 90% of the time they're sort of tragic. Somebody broke her ankle, shout out to Pleasance. So we've had so many things happen, but sometimes the way this shows up is falling in love. So you had a tragedy when you signed up, the tragedy of falling in love, if I can share that. And honestly, this is, it's just as bad as a surprise kitchen remodel.
Which I also did.
Oh, good. Oh, nice. I didn't know you had one of those too. Yeah. So stuff will show up because the universe is asking, do you really want to do this? Yeah. And falling in love is like a great reason not to get stuff done. Like, there's so much Netflix binging to happen and dinners to be made and, you know, dating. So you've fallen in love over the last 6 months. Talk a little bit about how that's affected writing the book. Did it ever make you want to quit? And how'd you get through it?
It did. It was scary to have that happening at the same time that I was writing a story to a widow who has a newly dead husband. And I had to sort of navigate, was I still allowed to write the book? Because now I have this love story in my life. And it felt really good to be able to do that because you gave me some tools to go back to that place. It was scary to leave behind like the happy love story nest and go back to the day that I found out my husband died, because there's so much sharing in the book about what that felt like. And so you gave me some tools, and one of them was music. So I remembered some of the songs that I would listen to early on in my story, and I would play those songs while I was writing the book because it would help transport me back to that place. And it was scary, and my body hated it. I got sick. I was having migraines. It was a scary thing to go back toward that part of my story. And it was lovely to be able to then step away from the music, step into the fresh air, come back to right now. And it was a healing process to learn how to be inside of that part of my story and not have it mean anything about my now.
Yep. So powerful. Well, it's been so fun not only to watch this book get born, but watch this relationship get born, and just seeing how many people have been changed by the freedom that you allow for people with the Grief Unveiled process. So it may be that you're a widow. There may be someone in your life who has lost a partner, and you haven't known how to have that conversation. This is a whole different way of looking at grief. Grief Unveiled by Sarah Nannen, a widow's guide to navigating your journey of life after loss. It is possible. And please get a copy on Amazon, especially if you know somebody who really needs this. Share this book with them. I think it can make a huge impact. I know that it has already in so many people's lives. So thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Congratulations to #1 best-selling author, Sarah Nannen.